Hi, everyone. This is going to be a continuation of our series about who said this. We're going to make a modification this time, and you'll see what it is. We're going to ask also who wrote this, what prophet or what book of the Bible is this in. And this is now you're trying to get to fifth grade. This is a bit harder than you've had up to now. So we're going to make it a little bit more difficult. But so it might be harder to pass. But that means when you go back and repeat, you're going to actually be memorizing things that are important, particularly passages of the Word of God. So why does Jesus say he is our one pastor? John 10:16. So we're going to have kind of a sub-theme on that. And we're going to hopefully learn a little bit of the answer by going through messianic prophecies in the law, prophets, and writings, as well as in the New Testament. All right, so let's take a look at Jesus talking in John 10, verses 1 to 8 in the KJV. And I'm just going to point out that the word thura in this verse, in verse 1 of chapter 10, also means gate. And I'm going to mention that, and you'll see why. Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that enters not by the door into the sheepfold, or gate into the sheepfold, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber. But he that enters in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him, now who's entering in the door? The shepherd of the sheep. That'll be important. To him, the porter, or better word, is watchman, according to Mounce's transliteral. To him, the watchman opens. So there's somebody who watches the gate to let in the shepherd, the pastor, opens. And the sheep keep listening. And I have to pause there. So the verb tense in Greek is present indicative active PIA if you look at BibleHub.com. And that properly is translated by a continuous, what we call gerund tense in English, where you add an ing at the end of a verb. So keep listening is a gerund, and that is synonymous with a present indicative active in most cases. So to him, the watchman opens, and the sheep keep listening to his voice. And he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. And when he puts forth his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep keep following him. Another present indicative active, for they know his voice. They recognize his voice. And a stranger will they not follow. That means somebody who doesn't talk like Jesus, who has different concepts and teachings than Jesus, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers. And that is, they're strange to them because they're so familiar with Jesus, they can see a complete difference with the other voice. Skip verse 6, verse 7. Then said Jesus unto them, again, verily, verily, I say unto you, I am the door, or the gate. That's important. Of the sheep. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear, which means in that parlance of that era, hear didn't mean actually hear words, but meant that they did not follow or obey them. So the sheep, let's read verse 8 again. All that ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not obey them, meaning the thieves and robbers. So these are the sheep that have been listening to the shepherd, or pastor is another translation of the same word. All right, and we've already seen that thura is synonymous. You'll see why it's important. So here is where the word gate is used again, or the concept of a gate is used again, and this is in Matthew 7, verses 13 to 14. This is a complete translation just using Mounce because it's the best. Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and easy the way that leads to destruction, and many are those who enter through it. How narrow is the gate and difficult the way that leads to life, and few are those who find it. So what would a believer in Jesus Christ think about gospels that are taught today that are easy believism? If you believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, you shall be saved. 1 Corinthians 15, 1-4. It doesn't even pass the smell test because of this verse. So are you going to follow Jesus? Are you listening and keep listening to his words and recognizing when the words are the words of a stranger who doesn't know Jesus for real? That's what Jesus is giving you as a test. And if it's easy, it's not from him. If it's difficult, it's from him. It's not easy to follow Jesus. It's a difficult path because he gives you standards of ethics that you must follow to achieve eternal life. Oh my gosh, that sounds so works oriented. It's heresy. No, it isn't heresy. It's Jesus. Jesus, by definition, trumps whoever you are listening to who tells you that's heresy. That's the whole point. And you're going to see as we go forward that this is going to become clear when you integrate it with the words and the law prophets at the same time. All right. So the first question is, it's Zechariah or Isaiah? See that in the middle, bottom in dark print inside of a yellow box. So here is the verse. And yes, they are all dogs, fierce, greedy, which never have enough, and they are shepherds or pastors who cannot understand. They go all their own way, and every one of them looks to his own gain for their own advantage. Is this in the book of Zechariah or in the book of Isaiah? So we actually have been expounding on this recently, and so you may have seen that video. That may help you remember. Anyway, write down your answer, and now let's take a look. Okay, so the answer is Isaiah 56, verse 11. And that's from Bible Hub when you use their interlinear from Briggs, the top dictionary. Much better than Strong's, by the way. It's a concordance, not a dictionary. Okay, so let's go to question number 2. All right, so the question will be, if you look at the bottom, at the end of the question or the verse, you'll see it says Micah or Hosea. So think of, is this from Micah or is it from Hosea as I'm reading it to you? For the Israelites will live many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred stones, without ephod or idol. Afterward, the Israelites will return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, i.e., David's heir. Obviously, they will come trembling to the Lord and to his blessings in the last days. So, the last days prophecy about Israel will have lived many days without a king or prince, without sacrifice, and all of that. And yet, they're going to turn to the Lord in the end of days. So what's the answer? Is it Micah said this or Hosea? We'll take a look. All right. The answer is Hosea 3, verses 4 to 5. Make a note of that. And hopefully you've gotten these first two right. It's a 50-50 chance that you'll get it right or wrong, just so you know, if you think about it. So it's I'm trying to increase your odds, but you could still end up getting half of them right and half of them wrong if you don't know where these verses are coming from. But here's the thing. If you don't remember as you're reading it, study it as we're doing this, and then come back and repeat this portion and make sure you help memorize these verses where they're coming from. Okay, so this one is between Habakkuk or Ezekiel. See there in the bottom middle? Okay, verse 12. I seek out my sheep and will deliver them out of all places where they have been scattered in the cloudy and dark day. And I will set up one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, even my servant David. And put a little mark, you'll see why later, asterisk. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd. So David's going to have an heir. So this is talking about that. David has been long dead at this time, whichever one this is. He shall feed them, and he shall be their shepherd, and I, the Lord, will be their God, and my servant David a prince among them. I, the Lord, have spoken it. So you see there's a shepherd or pastor who will be from the house of David. So that's what this is a prophecy about. Is this in Habakkuk or Habakkuk or Ezekiel? So take a notation, make a mark, and then we'll see which way it is. All right, so the answer is Ezekiel 34, verses 12 and 23 to 24 in the KJV. Hope you got that right. Let's go to the next one. Okay, so this is a little bit longer reading. It's you'll see there at the bottom there, it's either Isaiah or Samuel. So as I'm reading it, think about that. So verse 12, and when thy days be fulfilled, and thou shalt sleep with thy fathers, I will set up thy seed after you, which shall proceed out of your bowels, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build an house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he shall be my son. If he commits iniquity, I will chasten him with the rod of men, and with the stripes of the children of men. But my mercy shall not depart away from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away before thee. And thine house and thy kingdom shall be established forever before thee. Thy throne shall be established forever. All right, so is this Isaiah or Samuel? So make a note of that. And please notice that he's talking about the house of David there in the last verse, 16. Let's take a look. Okay, so before we get to the verse, let's read Jesus' introductory verse. Jesus warned, "Beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves." Matthew 7, verse 15, the King James Version. Were they a thief and a robber? These wolves, yes, they're the thief and the robber. They fit within what we've talked about on that topic. So now here's a verse, and the question you'll see there in the bottom of the box, the green box, it says, is this Ezekiel or Genesis? So I'm going to read it and think about it, whether it's in one or the other, as I read it. Verse 27, Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. That is a division from Jewish church. That's a question mark. So spoil, by the way, is taking advantage of something illicitly that's not permissible. You've stolen it and whatever, and you're taking it as a spoil. It doesn't belong to you. Okay, so is this from the book of Ezekiel or the book of Genesis? So write it down, make a note, E or G, and we'll take a look. Okay, so the answer, this is in Genesis 49, verse 27. So now let's go to question 6. All right, so now we're going to read a prophecy from the very same text that we just read before. We told you the answer was Genesis, right? So now we're going to ask, who was prophesying in Genesis? Was it Abraham or Jacob? As we listen to this prophecy. So who gave this prophecy? Is it Abraham or Jacob in the book of Genesis? Verse 9, Judah is a lion's whelp. Judah is the tribe of where David comes from, by the way. Verse 10, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh, which is a word meaning peace, and so it's interpreted to mean a prince of peace, comes. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his fowl, his animal, unto the vine, and his donkey's colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. Who could that be? Who was prophesying about this? Was this Abraham or Jacob? Make a note, write down the letter A or J, and we'll see if you're right. Okay, so the answer is Jacob is prophesying over each of the 12 tribes. This was Judah. Previously, we saw he prophesied about Benjamin, the ravening wolf. In the morning, he devours his prey. In the evening, he divides up the spoil, his ill-gotten gains, or unauthorized from God gains. Okay, the next question is, what book of Tanakh is these 3 verses from? And this is, I want to give you a little clue. A heads up here is there are only 2 passages in the Bible that actually are expressly a messianic prophecy. So there's a lot of other verses that are interpreted to be about the Messiah, but these are the ones. There's 2. This is one. The other is in the book of Daniel in 9:25-26. It talks about a Messiah coming. Here, the word Messiah also is present, and I'll explain that as we go. But that's it. There's 2 passages. So this is a verse that, for a variety of reasons, is never taught to you, and you're going to see why. Just from these 3 verses, you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to read it, and the question is, what book of Tanakh does this come from? So you have to basically guess from all of the books in the Tanakh. The law, that's a Hebrew, the initials of law, prophets and writings in Hebrew come out to the sound Tanakh. So that's how I'm going to use a shorthand sometimes. It's shorter than saying the law, prophets, and writings. Okay, so here we go. Verse 1. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord Yahweh and against his anointed. The word in Hebrew is Mashiach, saying, let us break their bonds asunder, meaning the Yahweh and his anointed Messiah. They want to break the bonds and cast away their cords from us. So what book of the Tanakh is this from? So take a moment to think about that, and we'll go get the answer and be right back. Okay, so the answer is a Psalm of David, Psalm 2, King James Version. So there's a lot more in this passage to look at. It talks about kissing the sun's ring. You basically don't anger the sun because he holds all the power of judgment. So God has assigned this person to operate as a king over us, a ruler, a Meshiach. That's what it means to be anointed. That's what you would do with a king. You would anoint the king, and they become Meshiachs. But that's in Psalm 2, and there's a lot more there. But I want you to take away from this that the rulers of this world are the enemies of God, Yahweh, and the anointed, and tries to break the bond asunder. So something about their actual relationship, the world rulers will want to destroy the true nature of that relationship and give a distorted impression of what the relationship is between the Father and the Son. And I'm going to just throw this theory out at you, is that when Constantine did what he did to the church, he was a pagan and he died a pagan, and it's absolutely no doubt about it. We have lots of videos on it. So that was his a gift to his true God, which was the devil and demons, because that's who he was really about. He had statues of himself in both Rome and in Constantinople in the garb of being God of the Sun, Sol Invictus. So that's a fact, and it's unquestionable. And that statue was there the entire time through the Nicene Conference. So everyone who showed up in Constantinople and what's modern day Turkey, they saw it, and yet they kept their mouths closed because it was dangerous to speak against this man. So anyway, that's important, because we're going to now go into a little bit more about what Jesus says about this and what other people say about the authority of the rulers. Are they from God? Are they under Satan, or are they under God? So we're going to take a look at that. Okay, now I think all of us know who wrote the words here on the page. So the question is, what epistle in the Bible is this within? So think about that as I read it. Verse 13, let every soul, this is question 8, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. It's actually, this is the King James Version, it's actually governing authorities. If you go to Mountsy, for whatever reason, the King James is trying to make it vague. For there is no power, the real word is authority, Mountsy says, but of God. The authorities that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resists the authority resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. For rulers, the archon, are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power or the authority? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. Okay, so who wrote this? Well, no, excuse me, not who wrote it. I think we know who wrote it, but what epistle is it in the Bible that we're familiar with? Okay, so write down the name of the epistle, and then we'll see the correct answer to question 8. Okay, so the correct answer to question 8 is Romans 13, 1-3. Just want to point out, most translations are better than the verse. The first verse is very awkwardly stated. And what it really says is all authority comes from God, and those in position of authority have been placed there by God. So Paul makes a general statement, and then he uses that statement to deduce that every authority, that every ruler is from God, ordained by God. And by the way, the reason I'm showing the contrast here is that we saw in Psalm 2 that the Gentiles are the ones who are at odds with the kingdom of God and his son, the Messiah. And that, by the way, I forgot to mention in the later part of that chapter 2 of Psalm 2, God says to his son, "This day I've begotten thee." So he becomes a begotten being in time, and then he has to be the ruler, and God warns people to obey what this son of his says and kiss his ring, because he's basically got all the authority to be a judge. Okay, so it's very important to understand if the kingdoms of this world are against God and Yahweh and try to drive the bonds between them asunder, creating a different concept of what they are, and this is coming from the top, the government down, can it be true that what Paul said is that the authorities, the governing authorities, are from God? They're under authority of God, and if you disobey the governing authorities, you're going to be damned. He says you will suffer damnation if you do that. But what would Jesus say to that? Let's take a look. And this is the question. So it's a yes or no question. Did Jesus' response to this question that's going to be posed, or statement by the devil, did Jesus' response in Matthew 4 imply the devil had no such authority to give him all the kingdoms of the world, or does the devil have such authority over the nations? So let's read the verse. Matthew 4, verses 8 to 9, KJV. Again, the devil takes him up into an exceedingly high mountain and shows him all the kingdoms of the world and the glory of them. And the devil says unto him, all these things will I give you if you will fall down and worship me. Matthew 4, verses 8 to 9. And so the question posed to you is the person taking this test, did Jesus' response imply the devil had no such authority to be the ruler of the world, or instead did he believe the devil has the authority over the nations? So write it down, what you think Jesus' answer will say. I haven't shown it to you yet. We'll show it to you in the next slide, and then we'll discuss the point you can get or not for that answer. Okay, so here is the answer in Matthew KJV 4, Matthew 4, verse 10. Then says Jesus unto him, get thee hence, Satan, for it is written, thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve. So if Paul were correct that the governing authorities are only subject to God, and that's you must obey them because they're agents or ordained by God, that you must follow them, then why did Jesus not say something that, like, Satan, get away from me? You don't even have this authority. You can't give me the kingdoms. Obviously, Jesus' answer implies that Satan does have that power. And we're going to see another verse where Jesus says something similar. Okay, so question number 10, the final question. So this is going to take some thinking skills and to compare a verse against what we're reading from Paul, and building more than one verse together to understand Jesus. So this is John 12, verse 31. Now is the judgment of this world. Now with the ruler, the archon of this world, now will the ruler of this world be driven out. So the ruler of this world is obviously Satan. So Jesus is saying when that judgment comes, now Satan, the ruler of this world, will be driven out. Now, here's the question. What epistle in the Bible came later and contradicted Jesus about that the archons of this world are the enemy of evil behavior? So wasn't there an epistle that said the archon is the enemy of evil? Therefore, it only is seeking that you obey and do good. So therefore, obey what the archon tells you to do, the rulers of this world, the governing authorities. And this person tells you you must obey the archons of this world, the rulers of this world, because they're ordained by God. And if you disobey them, it's the same as disobeying God. And if you disobey God, you will suffer damnation. Okay, so this is important. Who was this person? Does this have that implication or not? And tell me again. Now this will help you remember what was the epistle we showed you where this was said. And we'll now go to the next slide and we'll show you the answer. Okay, so the answer is specifically in Romans 13, verse 3 in the KJV, but I specifically showed you how Mouncy has when you go to Mouncy reverse interlinear for Romans 13:3, you will see the word archon. And so Paul is saying you must obey the archon because that archon is ordained by God, and if you disobey them, you are disobeying God, and you will suffer damnation for disobeying the rules of people who Jesus say are under the control and domination of Satan. So Paul is basically saying obey Satan if it's Satan. And how could we have resisted during the Nicene pressure to move Passover to Easter? A worship of a pagan god is named Easter. How could we have been forced at Nicaea as just an incidental throwaway? He says you have to have nothing. Constantine says you can't have anything in common with the Jews, so you have to move Saturday Shabbat worship over to Sunday. That's the day of the God of the sun, who I am. He didn't tell Christians he thinks he's the God of the sun. That's why he wanted to worship on Sunday. So this is all going on, and of course, it's all being covered up because our church was totally under intimidation. And we know that because I told you about those two statues in Rome and in Constantinople. Everyone there knew that Constantine's face is on the statues. And we have the actual recovery of the statue in the Roman arena where it's exactly Constantine's face from paintings. All right, so let's go to the conclusion here. So I hope you have your final score, and I hope you've got at least 7 correct. If you don't, go back and redo this. You can start from the 3 or 4 minute point, and you'll just do the questions and answers, and they go, I hope, fairly rapidly. Okay, so how did you score of the 10 questions? If you did not receive 7 points, please redo this test until you pass. It's more important that we get these quotes down and the books of the Bible, the actual prophet's name or the book or epistle in the New Testament. Please go to the now. If you have passed, please then go to the 6th grade test next. Okay, God bless. Hope this helps everybody. Ciao. Bye.